So lesson 6 NS7 is going to talk about comparing and ordering rational numbers. Now I want to warn you ahead of time that the notes that I gave you, since they are from a book, they are going to have different numbers than what I have on my screen. I would like you to change all of your numbers in your book to what I have on my screen. Sorry, excuse me. All right. So let's start off by looking at just comparing integers. We're not going to worry about fractions and decimals with those integers just yet, but we have to talk about these negative numbers. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at this problem, and we're going to talk about, based on the number line, how we can order our numbers. So on this table, we have the team's record, and it's their combined win-loss record. So if they have a -4, that tells us that they lost 4 more games than they won. Here they have a +3, so they won 3 more games than they lost, so on and so forth. All right, so here we're going to start. So we want to plot these on the number line, and we know we always start at 0. So A is the Sharks. So they were at a -4. Negative is to the left of 0, so I'm going to place that at 4 spaces away from 0 to the left, which is -4. The Jaguars, team B, was 3. The Badgers, -7. The Tigers, -8. The Cougars, -1. The Hawks were at a -5. And then the Wolves were at a +7. All right. So now that we have these numbers graphed, we're going to take a look at how do we know, so which team had the best record in the league, and how do we know? Right, well, if you answered for this one that the Wolves have the highest record, you would be correct. The Wolves had the highest record. And how do I know that? Well, in order to have the highest record, they have to have the highest score, or the best score. And when I look at a number line, the number that's furthest to the right is always the largest. So even though over here with the Badgers I have a 7 again, since it's negative, it's further to the left, meaning it's smaller. Same thing as with this -8. Even though this is an 8, since it's negative, it's further to the left on the number line than this 7. Oops, we're going to run out of space here. Okay, so then let's use that same thought process to figure out who had the worst score. So take a minute, take a look. So if the furthest to the right was the largest, what would be the smallest? If you answered with the Tigers, you were correct. So the Tigers had the lowest record. And I know this because their number is the furthest to the left on the number line. Oh, I'm so sorry. All right. So here, even though the number is an 8, it's a -8, meaning it has to be to the left of 0, which means it's further to the left than any positive number. Think in terms of banking. So somebody who has $8 in their bank account, they might not have all that much, but they have more money than somebody who owes somebody else money. And we know that owing money means that it's a negative. All right. So keeping with this thought process, now we're going to start talking about when we have fractions and decimals. And this is the case where the numbers are different, so make sure that you take a second to change your numbers to look like mine. All right. So I have to take a look at my number line, and I have to be strategic about how I plot. So I have 1 3/5. So I know that I'm going to be at 1, and then I know that 3/5, so 1 and 3/5 means it has to be past 1. 3/5 is larger than half, so 3/5 is going to be right about here. Okay, and now we don't have to be perfect on here. If I had a larger number line that was a little bit more exact, we could be more exact. If we wanted to, you could go through. We can even do that. So each of these, so I could turn this into half, and those are fourths. It's a really thick pen there. All right, so then 3/5, is it more or less than 3/4? Well, it's going to be less than, so we know that 3/5 has to be between the 3/4 and the half. Okay. For right now, though, we're just going to focus on a general spot on the number line because we're not going to be comparing anything that's overly close to it. So now I have 3 and 8/10, so I get to 3 and 8/10 is more than half, and it's closer to 4 than it is to half, so I'm going to plot it right about here, because I also know it's more than 3/4. 4 and 9/10, so again 4, and it's bigger than 4, and 9/10 is almost all the way to 5. And then I have exactly 2, so you should be able to be exact with that one. Then I have 5 and 3/10. So 3/10 again is less than 5, but a little bit more than 1/4. And then here I have -1/2. So now I'm actually going to the left starting at 0. And I'm sorry, not -1/2. I have -1 and 2/10. Now I know 2/10 is less than half, and it is less than 25/100. So I'm going to go ahead and put that a little bit closer to the -1. Now it seems weird because when we're in the negative world, again, everything is going to the left. So the further left that you go, the further away from 0 that you get. So it's not that your number is getting bigger, it's that your number's absolute value is getting bigger. So its distance from 0 is getting bigger. So looking at this, we want to know which number is the third least number. Oops, I didn't realize that I missed that one. Sorry. First, we're going to do list the numbers in order from least to greatest. So again, on a number line, we start from the left and work our way to the right. So this number here we know was the -1 and 2/10. The next number was the 1 and 3/5. After that, we had 2. After the 2 came the number with the 3, which was 3 and 8/10. Because I know I'm still between 3 and 4, so that one has to start with a 3. Here I'm between 4 and 5, so I know it starts with the 4, so that's the 4 and 9/10. And then my last number was the 5 and 3/10. Okay. So I wrote my numbers from least to greatest, and I did so using the number line, working my way from left to right on the number line, left being the smallest, right being the largest. Okay. If I don't have a number line and I have fractions and I have decimals, it's going to be best to convert either all my fractions to decimals or all my decimals to fractions. Now, typically when I talk about adding and subtracting or multiplying and dividing, I always tell you, go with fractions. They're actually a lot simpler. But I will say when it comes to comparing, convert your fractions to decimals. It is significantly easier to compare decimals than it is to compare fractions. All right, so when I'm looking at this, which is the third least number? Well, this is my least. So then this would be my second least, and then 2 would be my third least. What is my second greatest number? So 5 and 3/10 is my greatest, so 4 and 9/10 would be my second greatest. So I know we're ordering the numbers on the number line, but what I would like to do here is I would actually like to take this out because the next thing that we go on to do is we start to talk about writing inequalities. And so I would like to go over how to order rational numbers without having a number line. But at this point, I would hope that you understand that using a number line, the numbers that are further to the right, the further to the right you go on the number line, the bigger the numbers get. The further to the left you go on the number line, the smaller they get. So negative 100 is going to be smaller than a positive 1. It seems odd, but having a dollar in your pocket is more than owing somebody $100. All right, so if I'm going to list my numbers from least to greatest, and I have all these different numbers up here, one of the first things that I need to do is I need to look at these numbers and decide, am I going to convert them to fractions or am I going to convert them to decimals? All right, so I told you that, especially in my mind, I find it easier to convert my fractions to decimals and then compare that way. Right? You can also compare using halves and fourths, and if this is something that you want to address, we can definitely talk about it more in class. But if you feel most comfortable, I want you to make sure you work with the way that works for you. All right, so here I have 5 6/10, so I'm good. And then I have negative 8, so I don't have to change that. Here, though, I have 3 1/4. So I'm going to take that 1/4, and I'm going to multiply it by 25 on the bottom and 25 on the top. So I can get it to 100 on the bottom, and then it becomes 25 on top. So what this tells me then is that 3 1/4 is the same thing as 3 25/100. And then I have a negative 4, and I have a positive 7, and I have a negative 2. Now looking at this, I should be able to convert these, or I should be able to determine what's least and greatest without converting all of my fractions to decimals because my whole numbers are all different. Okay, and because the number, so the whole number meaning the number in front of the decimal, or the integer, so the number in front of the decimal. But I wanted to show you that you need to make sure that you convert your fraction into something with a denominator of either 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. So all those different place values, because remember you have the tenths and the hundredths and the thousandths, and that's how we convert. So here this was 25 hundredths. So I have 25 and it ends in the hundredths place. All right, so now looking at this, even though I would look at it and usually say that 8 is my largest number, I'm actually going to look and see that 8 is my smallest number because 8, negative 8, is to the left of 0 on the number line. All right, so one of the ways you can look at it is I'm going to look for my biggest number first. And my biggest number without negatives is 8. Okay, well, that 8 has a negative, so it actually has to be my smallest number. Another way I can do this is I can use absolute values to help me decide how far away it is from 0. So it's 8 spaces away from 0, so it has to be smaller than negative 4, which is only 4 spaces away from 0. All right? So we use absolute value just to help us determine how far from 0, and then how far from 0 and in which direction helps us determine the size and comparing and ordering. All right, so I have negative 8. Well, my next biggest absolute value is 7, and that's not negative, so it can't go next. So then my next biggest absolute value, so here, so 7, and then 5 6/10, 3 25/100, negative 4. Oops, I already wrote negative 4. So instead of negative 4, I don't know why I just scratched that out instead of using my eraser. That's just silly. That's what erasers are made for when we make mistakes. All right, so then here I have the negative 2. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. Okay, so then my next biggest number is 7, but that's a positive number, so it might not go next. Okay, so looking at it, if I continue on, I have -4. So I have 4, but it is negative, so that is going to be my next smallest number. Okay, so I've used these two already. And then going through, my next number is -2, and that's 2 spaces from 0, so it has to be my next smallest because it's the only negative number I have left. Okay, so then now it seems weird, but now that I'm in the positives, I can look for the smallest number again, so that smallest number in front of the decimal, and just work my way up like we normally would. So here I would have 3 5/10, because 3 5/10, oh, that's not 5/10, that should be 25/100. There we go, because 3 25/100 is smaller than 5 6/10, regardless of the decimal size. And then it would be 5 6/10, and then it would be 7. Okay, so we use the absolute value to help us determine which numbers are furthest away from 0, so we can help us determine which ones are smaller and which ones are larger. Another good way to look at it, and what might be a little bit easier for some of us, is to say, okay, well, these are my negative numbers. So it was -8, -4, and -2. And just look at the absolute value of those. So if I just look at the absolute value of those, because they have to be smaller than the positives, because they're to the left of 0 no matter what. So 8 is actually 8 spaces to the left of 0, so it would have to be the smallest. -4 is only 4 spaces from 0, so it's going to be a little bigger than that -8. And then -2 is only 2 spaces away from 0, so it has to be bigger than both the -8 and the -4. And then after that, we can just order numbers as we are comfortable with and normally do when we talk about positive numbers. For the most part, we've done all of this before. It's just a matter of throwing those negative numbers in there. Okay, so now we're going to start with writing inequalities. So on December 18th, the high temperature in Portland, Oregon was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. On January 18th, the high temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Which day was warmer? Right, so I want to know which day was warmer. And in order to know which day was warmer, I need to know what were the temperatures for each of the days. All right, so in this case, it was 42 degrees Fahrenheit on December 18th, and then it was 28 degrees Fahrenheit on January 18th. And I can do what we've done before, and I can plot them and say, okay, here's 28, and this is the January date, and then here's 42, and this is the December date. So I know that 42 has to be greater than 28 because it is further to the right than 28 on the number line. All right. So now I'm going to use an inequality symbol to compare them. So I know that 48 is greater than, so I'm going to use the greater than symbol, 28. And if you get confused with the greater than, the less than symbol is an L, so there's my L, but it's an L that was knocked over. So if you take this L, and you just rotate it ever so slightly, hey, look at that. It is now a less than symbol. So that has helped me a lot because even though I do this all the time, I still have to slow down and go, okay, that's the L, so that's the less than. Just one of those silly little tricks that really helps. Okay. All right, so again, when we're looking at the number line, since 42 is further to the right, it's greater. But now I'm looking at it in regards to 28. So since 28 is further to the left, this means that 28 is less than 42. It has to be less than 42 because it's further to the left. So then now, since 28 is less than 22, I have to use that tipped over L symbol. So less than 42. So since 42 is greater than 28, and we can also say it that 28 is less than 42, the temperature was warmer on, well, now I forget which day is which, so we can go back. I'm sure you can see it on your notes. So it was 42 degrees on December 8th. So oddly enough, it was actually warmer on December 18th. Okay, so now we're going to use the number line to help us compare each of these numbers, remembering that the further to the left a number is, the smaller it is. So here I'm comparing -10 and -2. Here's my -10, here's my -2. So -10 is less than -2, which seems so weird, but in negative world you have to think it's opposite world. Everything is opposite. Here I have -6 and 6. So they're both the same distance away from 0. However, the -6 goes to the left, so it actually has to be less than the +6. On the next one, we have 7 and 1/10. So -7 and 1/10, which is going to be right about here. And then we have -8 and 3/10. So we're right about there. Well, -8 and 3/10 is further to the left. It's further away from 0. So -7 and 1/10 is actually going to be greater than -8 and 3/10. So now we're going to take a look at how we can write one inequality in two different ways, or one comparison in two different ways. So I have -2 and 18. Well, I know -2 is further to the left. It's smaller. So I have -2 is less than 18. So I'm comparing the -2 to the 18 in regards to where the -2 is. I can also look at it and say, well, 18 is greater than -2. I can compare it based on where the 18 is. I want you to try to write two inequalities comparing 39 and -39 and then come back and check your answers. So you should have gotten that you could do 39 is greater than -39 and that -39 is less than 39. Notice if I flip the numbers, I have to flip the direction of the inequality symbol. All right, so now we want to look at which one is ordered from least to greatest. So I want you to take a minute and take a look at these on your own and decide which one you think is correct, A, B, C, or D. And then I want you to come back and check your answer. Please remember that if you got it wrong, I want you to go through why we got the answers that we did, and I want you to write little notes down to help yourself when you're comparing. Okay, so to compare, here I have -8/10, and it comes before 1 and 2/10, which makes sense because it's least to greatest. But then I have a -19. So this automatically doesn't work because -19 has to be smaller than 1 and 2/10 because it's further to the left on the number line. So number 1 has to be incorrect. Okay, so another way you can go through is you can go through and look and see, okay, negative, 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 positive, positive. Again, I have this negative up here by these positive numbers. Even though it's a 19, since it's negative, it has to go at the end. Here we just looked at that it was 1, 4, 8, 1, 1. We can't do that. We have to remember that if it's least to greatest, all the negatives are going to have to go in the first part of the line. So here I have the -19 as first, so it's my furthest away from 0, my furthest to the left, which so far so good. And then as I work my way up the line, my numbers are getting closer to 0. I would be moving further to the right on the number line. Now I've passed 0 and I've gone into the positive world, so I know that I have to get further away from 0 in a positive manner. But here I have 1 and 1/10 and 1 and 6/10. So I can line them up like this. Well, my 1s are the same, but here the 6 is bigger. So that tells me that 1 6/10 has to be bigger than 1 1/10. So far, so good. And then here I have 2. So right now, C is the front runner for being correct. Now if I go through again and I look, I have my negatives. I have -1, -4, but that's automatically wrong because -1 is going to be closer to 0 than -4 is. So this is actually going to be further to the left. So D cannot be right either. Right? So what I would like you to do in this next section of your notes is I want you to jot down a couple of notes, a couple of things that are going to help you when you're comparing your numbers. So one of the things we talked about is on a number line, the number that's further to the left is smaller and numbers that are further to the right are larger. So writing down, I want you to write down at least 3 little tips that will help you with comparing, even if that's talking about how to compare fractions or how to compare decimals.